I was a senior analyst forced to clean the kitchen while my boss gave his drinking buddy a $10K morale bonus. So I logged every chore, filed an expense report titled, How You Waste Talent, and watched the board compare my numbers to his. When the email came in, it looked like a normal request. Hey, could you tidy the kitchen before the client visit? Except it wasn't a one-time favor. It was the fifth time that week, and it wasn't coming from facilities or admin staff. It was from my boss, Daniel, the same man who just handed a $10,000 team morale bonus to his drinking buddy, Kyle, a junior analyst who hadn't finished a report in 3 months. I stared at the message for a full minute, reading that line over and over again. It builds character. You should be grateful you even have a job right now. That was his reply when I'd asked, politely, why I, a senior analyst managing multi-million-dollar accounts, was scrubbing coffee stains out of the microwave every afternoon. Grateful for a job I'd already overperformed in for years. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a temporary thing. Maybe he was stressed. But when I overheard him in the hallway laughing with Kyle, saying, "You just have to break them in early, keeps them humble," something inside me shifted. I kept my mouth shut, put on a neutral face, and cleaned that damn kitchen like it was a sacred ritual. Every dish, every counter. And after each humiliating task, I logged my hours, took photos, and kept receipts, paper towels, sanitizer, trash bags. All marked as project cleanup, per Daniel's directive. The first week, I was angry. The second week, I started documenting everything. I noticed how he delegated all his actual work, data analysis, client forecasting, to the rest of us. He took the credit during meetings, then disappeared at 3 p.m. to network. The same week he forgot to approve my quarterly review, I saw him Venmo Kyle for beers and morale. But I didn't say a word. I just smiled, cleaned, and waited. And when he made me stay late to mop the floor before a leadership breakfast, I smiled again, because by then my report was almost finished. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't a rant. It was a detailed financial breakdown of how much company time, money, and skilled labor Daniel had wasted under the label of character building. I attached every receipt, timestamp, and email. I even included a graph comparing my completed deliverables against his. Then I printed it, signed it, and sent it to the entire executive board under one subject line: How You Waste Talent. And that's when things got interesting, because the board didn't just ignore it. They called me in. Individually, Daniel had no idea what was coming. I wasn't supposed to end up under Daniel's management. When I first joined the company, I reported directly to Ellen, the VP of Strategy. She was sharp, fair, and believed in results over office politics. She'd once told me, "If you deliver, you'll never have to shout for credit." And she was right. For the first 2 years, I thrived. I'd built models that landed 2 of our biggest clients, saved a 6-figure account from walking out, and even trained new analysts. I was good, really good, and everyone knew it. Then Ellen took medical leave, and they brought in Daniel from another division, temporarily. From day one, he radiated that kind of smugness you only see in guys who think charm counts as intelligence. He wore designer loafers, never carried a laptop, and used phrases like circle back and synergy opportunities like they meant something. He'd inherited a team of hardworking analysts, and instead of leading, he started rearranging things, assigning meaningless team tasks, renaming projects, adding unnecessary meetings just to show management initiative. At first, I tried to play along. I figured if I just kept my head down, he'd rotate out once Ellen came back. But Daniel made sure to leave a mark. He started small, public corrections in meetings, subtle digs about how I talked too confidently for an analyst. Then he began reassigning my projects to Kyle, his ex-college frat buddy who joined a few months earlier. Kyle didn't even know how to format a pivot table. But Daniel liked having him around. They'd grab drinks after work, come in late, joke loudly in the open office while the rest of us scrambled to meet deadlines. The message was clear. Daniel ran the show, and loyalty mattered more than competence. The day it really sank in was the first team-building Friday. He walked into our workspace with a stupid grin and a whiteboard marker, saying, "Today's about ownership. We'll rotate duties so everyone gets a taste of every role." That's how I got the kitchen, and somehow it stuck. Every Friday turned into maintenance day. Everyone had to pitch in, but soon enough, Daniel stopped asking Kyle to do anything. He's working on morale initiatives, Daniel said with a straight face. When I pushed back gently, just asked why I was scrubbing mugs instead of finishing my client report, he smirked and said, "You should be grateful. I'm teaching you leadership through humility." That's when I realized he didn't respect me, he resented me. The rest of the team noticed, too. They'd whisper apologies, say things like, "You shouldn't have to do that," but no one dared to speak up. Daniel had already scared one junior analyst into quitting by writing them up for insubordination after they questioned a pointless task. So I kept my head down, nodded, and played along. But I wasn't submissive, I was observing. Every time Daniel lied about numbers in meetings, every time Kyle disappeared for hours, every time Daniel called me sweetheart in front of clients, I wrote it down. It wasn't about revenge yet. At that point, it was about proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that someone like him could be taken down the same way he played the game, quietly, methodically, and with data. And by the time Ellen returned from medical leave, that proof was about to become something much, much bigger. When Ellen came back, I thought everything would go back to normal. She was my safety net, smart, respected, the kind of leader who could smell manipulation a mile away. But Daniel had already gotten comfortable. He'd made himself look indispensable, taking credit for team productivity while blaming me for not adapting to new management culture. I didn't realize how deep it went until Ellen called me into her office for a performance alignment conversation. I walked in thinking we were just catching up. She looked uncomfortable, polite, but guarded. She slid a printout across her desk. It was my quarterly review. "Underperforming in teamwork and adaptability," it said. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. I'd doubled our client satisfaction scores that quarter. I'd been doing my job and cleaning kitchens. Then Ellen sighed and said, "Daniel mentioned you've been resistant to collaborative initiatives. I just wanted to hear your side before we move forward." Collaborative initiatives. That's what he called making me mop floors. I told her everything, the kitchen, the comments, the favoritism, even the receipts I'd been keeping. She listened carefully, nodded, but didn't say much. I could tell she wanted to believe me, but Daniel had already built his version of the story, that I was entitled and difficult. When I finished, she just said, "Let me look into this." A week later, Daniel started making things worse. He pulled me aside after a meeting, leaned against the doorway, and whispered, "You shouldn't have gone over my head. Makes you look uncooperative." His smile was the kind that made my skin crawl. "But I forgive you. Now, if you really want to show initiative, the fridge needs deep cleaning. Clients are visiting tomorrow." I swear, I felt something snap inside me. That night, I stayed late, not to clean, but to work. I opened a blank Excel sheet and started building what would eventually become my weapon. A time log that matched every hour I spent cleaning, every wasted task, every directive Daniel gave that had nothing to do with my role. I labeled columns: date, task, wasted time, hours, associated cost, salary rate, notes. By midnight, I'd tracked 52 hours of non-analytical labor since Daniel took over. That was more than a full work week. I calculated the cost, $29.80 in salary hours. Then I went further. I compared productivity metrics from before and after Daniel's arrival. The drop was measurable. Client deliverables were delayed by 28%. His expense reports had doubled. Kyle's logged hours, a joke. I saved it all. When I came in the next morning, Daniel was bragging to the team about how the client loved his latest pitch deck. The deck I had made. He hadn't even changed the file name, my initials were still in it. That's when I stopped feeling angry. I felt calm, like everything suddenly made sense. I realized Daniel didn't just want control, he wanted credit for my work, obedience for his ego, and humiliation for his entertainment. So I gave him what he wanted. I smiled, cleaned, nodded, and kept collecting, because I wasn't just tracking wasted hours anymore. I was building a case. And when Daniel made one final favor request, something that crossed every professional line, I knew it was time to stop collecting and start acting. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. Daniel called me into a quick sync right before the team meeting. I walked in expecting another pointless lecture about attitude. Instead, he shut the door, leaned against the desk, and said, "We've got an issue with compliance. I need you to quietly adjust some numbers in the last report before the board sees it. Just smooth things out, make the forecast look steadier." He said it so casually, like he was asking me to refill the coffee pot. I froze. That report wasn't just internal, it was part of a quarterly presentation for the board. The data tied directly to client spending projections. Fudging those numbers would be fraud. I told him flat out, "That's illegal." He smirked, like he'd been waiting for me to say that. "No, it's strategic positioning. Don't make this difficult, all right? You're a team player." That's when I understood. Daniel wasn't just lazy or arrogant, he was dirty, and he needed a scapegoat. He wanted me to alter data so that if things blew up later, he could blame me, the disgruntled analyst with attitude problems. He'd already started setting that narrative with Ellen and HR. So I didn't refuse. I said, "Sure, send me the details." He smiled like he'd won something, but what I was really doing was baiting him. That night, I forwarded his request to my personal email, along with the spreadsheet he'd attached. I opened the company's compliance policy, screenshotted the section on falsifying data, and saved that too. Then I pulled up a new folder on my desktop and titled it, Daniel Evidence Final. As I dug deeper into our shared drives, I noticed something strange. Daniel had been submitting duplicate expense reimbursements, travel, client dinners, software licenses. When I cross-referenced them, half were bogus. Team dinner, charges that matched dates he was out drinking with Kyle. Software renewal, invoices that were literally copy-pasted templates with no vendor info. It was fraud. Actual, documented fraud. But the real gut punch came when I saw my name listed on one of the invoices. Data consulting, billed under M. Ray's, $3,200. Except I'd never done that project. Never even heard of it. Daniel had used my name on a fake invoice to make one of his reimbursements look legitimate. I checked the date. It was the same week he'd warned me about being a team player. He wasn't just trying to control me, he was actively setting me up as the fall guy for his mess. That's when the fear hit. Because if this went public and he played his cards right, I could actually lose my job, maybe even face investigation. But fear didn't last long. By the time I left the office that night, I'd already backed up every file to a private drive and printed hard copies. I didn't sleep. I just sat at my kitchen table staring at the folder, feeling the anger turn into something sharper, focused, deliberate. I wasn't just going to report him. I was going to make sure he couldn't talk his way out of this. He thought he was clever. He thought I'd stay scared. But I had the receipts, literally. And if he wanted to play games with my name, I was about to show him what happens when the quiet one decides to fight back. I moved slow and quiet like someone defusing a bomb, because that's what this felt like, one wrong cut and everything explodes on me. I set up a workspace at my apartment in Chicago, 2 blocks from the river, with my laptop, a legal pad, and a cheap coffee that tasted like it cost less than $5. The city noise blurred into the background. All I had to do was be smarter than a man who assumed charm could substitute for competence. Step 1. Preserve evidence. I copied every file Daniel had touched to an external drive and to cloud storage outside the company. Email threads, expense PDFs, the fake invoice with my name on it, his message asking me to smooth the forecast. Everything got timestamped and hashed so it couldn't be tampered with later. I printed the most damning stuff and put it in an envelope I labeled in ballpoint pen. For board immediate. Old school paper felt heavier and more real. Step 2. Build the narrative. Data on its own is cold. People need a story. I created a timeline. When Daniel started, when Ellen went on leave, dates of missing deliverables, timestamps of my kitchen duty, expense reimbursements, the Venmo link to Kyle, the fake invoice. I matched it with my performance metrics, projects finished, client emails praising work, charts showing the 28% drop in deliverables. I formatted it like a board-ready packet. Clean, professional, impossible to dismiss as a petty gripe. Step 3. Inoculate myself. If Daniel could plant things, I needed witnesses. I quietly copied Slack conversations and private messages from 2 colleagues who'd vented about his nepotism. I asked one of them, Jenna from Analytics, to confirm a few dates over text. Nothing dramatic, just, "Do you remember when Daniel made us stay late to clean before the client visit?" She replied, "Yes." So stupid. That text went into the folder. I also found a calendar invite where Daniel had added Kyle to a client lunch that wasn't on any client calendar, a smoking gun for a fabricated expense. Step 4. Choose the strike. I considered HR, I considered Ellen, I considered going straight to the board anonymously. Each option had risks. HR was friendly but slow, Ellen was on the board's good side but might be gaslit. Anonymous complaints get ignored or routed back to middle management. I wanted irrevocable visibility, something that forced the board to audit, not politely, look into it. So I did what a lot of people told themselves they'd never do. I crafted an executive summary and addressed it to the entire board and the CEO. The subject line was plain: how you waste talent, evidence of financial misconduct and misuse of staff time. I attached the packet, the invoices, the screenshots, and a time log labeled exactly by date and time. I wrote it in clean language, no emotion, just facts and supporting docs. Emotion can be dismissed, evidence can't. Step 5, contingency. If this blew back, I needed allies. I scheduled a lunch with Ellen under the guise of catching up, planning to gauge whether she believed the timelines I had. I also messaged a lawyer friend, not to initiate legal action yet, but to get a sense of exposure and next steps if the company tried to scapegoat me. I didn't mention specifics, just hypotheticals. Her response was 2 paragraphs: preserve evidence, do not delete anything, get everything off corporate servers. I slept maybe 3 hours that night. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt like someone who'd been shoved into a fight and had no choice but to fight clean. The hardest part was clicking send. Daniel had given me plenty to work with, but sending meant I could not walk it back. It meant choosing the path where there'd be no quiet return to normal. The email went out at 8:07 a.m., Chicago time, with delivery receipts on. I walked into the office an hour later and acted like nothing had happened. I brewed coffee for the team, smiled, and answered a junior analyst's question about a projection. Daniel was oblivious. He smiled at me the way predators smile when the rabbit still hasn't realized the trap is sprung. Then the first board member called my direct line. When the board member called me, I expected formality, maybe a polite request for clarification. Instead, I heard tension in his voice. "Maria," he said, "thank you for sending that packet. We're already aware of some discrepancies. Can you meet with internal audit today? Already aware." That phrase hit me like a cold slap. It meant Daniel's corruption wasn't an isolated thing. Someone higher up knew, or at least suspected, and they'd been sitting on it. I agreed to the meeting. It was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. in Conference Room B, the one with no windows and the flickering light that always made you feel like you were in a bad cop movie. Before that, I watched Daniel strut around the office like usual. He even stopped by my desk, grinning. "Hey, superstar," he said. "Remember to tidy up before the execs visit later, all right?" I smiled back. "Of course, Daniel." He walked off, whistling. At 1:45, I printed my backup packet and walked to the conference room. The board member was there, along with Ellen and a woman from internal audit I didn't recognize. They looked serious, not performative HR serious, but we already found something big serious. They asked me to confirm the authenticity of the files I'd sent. I did. Then the auditor leaned forward and said, "We need you to see this." She turned her laptop around. On the screen was another spreadsheet, Daniel's personal expense file, extracted from the system. Only this one had something that made my stomach twist. My name was on 8 more fake invoices. 8. He'd been using my name for months, probably to launder reimbursements under a trusted employee. Every false claim had gone through during the same period Ellen was out on leave. He hadn't just planned to make me the fall guy, he'd already done it. I felt sick. If I hadn't sent that report, I might have found myself facing disciplinary action, maybe even legal trouble. The auditor went on. "We also discovered unauthorized bonuses paid to a consultant named Kyle M. That was his drinking buddy." Ellen rubbed her temples, whispering, "I can't believe this." But the twist wasn't that Daniel was dirty. I'd already suspected that. The real twist came next. The board member leaned back and said quietly, "Maria, it seems Daniel wasn't working alone." He clicked open an email chain. There, in the CC line of multiple fraudulent approvals, was one of the board members themselves. Someone on the board had been signing off on Daniel's bogus reimbursements. And guess who had recently started lobbying for Daniel to be made Director of Strategic Operations? That same board member, Thomas Briggs, head of finance oversight. It hit me fast. Daniel wasn't just an ego-driven jerk. He was a useful pawn. Thomas was using him to funnel company money through fake operational expenses, using Daniel's arrogance as cover. And Daniel probably thought he was untouchable because a board member was backing him. The auditor's tone changed. "Maria, we're launching a full investigation. You did the right thing coming forward. But you need to be careful, this goes beyond Daniel." That night, I sat in my car for an hour after work, staring at the city lights reflecting off the river. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I had exposed Daniel, sure. But now I was in the middle of something bigger, something dangerous, political, and dirty. The next morning, Daniel's office door was locked. Word spread fast. "Administrative leave." People whispered, stared at me, avoided eye contact. But I knew this wasn't over. Because if Thomas Briggs had built this network, he wouldn't just let one analyst destroy it quietly. He'd come for me next. And I was already planning how to make that move public, with proof no one could bury. They put Daniel on leave that Thursday. He didn't even pack his things. Security escorted him out mid-morning, right after he came in wearing that same smug grin. People whispered, a few clapped quietly when he left, but I didn't. I just sat at my desk, pretending to work while my inbox flooded with half-curious, half-sympathetic messages. By the afternoon, the audit team called me again. They'd gone through his personal laptop company property, and what they found made my stomach turn. It wasn't just about money. Daniel had an entire folder titled Team Notes. Inside were Word documents with names of people on our team, including mine, followed by phrases like pliable, resistant, useful under pressure, replaceable. He'd been profiling us. One document stood out. Ray's plan, compliance risk. It detailed everything from my project habits to how I respond emotionally to condescension. He'd literally written that my need for fairness made me predictable, could be used for accountability scapegoat narrative if required. That's when I realized Daniel hadn't just stumbled into this corruption. He'd been recruited for it. The audit team told me something that still makes me cold inside. Daniel wasn't hired through standard HR channels. He'd been placed in our division by recommendation from the same board member, Thomas Briggs. Daniel's role was never just management. He was there to optimize expense structures. Translation: make fraudulent spending look legitimate by laundering it through team budgets. When Ellen went on medical leave, they saw their chance. They needed someone senior enough to process reimbursements but not high enough to be noticed by the CFO. Someone ambitious but compliant. Daniel had a history, 2 quiet resignations from previous firms, both times following internal restructuring. No formal charges, no noise. He was the kind of guy who could look like middle management while playing bagman. And his team-building tactics, making me clean kitchens, humiliating me, they weren't random cruelty. They were control mechanisms. Ways to test obedience, break down resistance, and identify who could be manipulated into signing off on false expenses without asking questions. But I didn't break. That's why he'd turned on me. The kitchen discipline, the condescending lines about gratitude, even that fake invoice with my name on it, all of it was part of the plan to turn me into the fall girl when the audit inevitably came. He wasn't improvising. He was following a playbook. When I left the office that night, I couldn't stop replaying that line he'd said weeks earlier. "It builds character, you should be grateful you even have a job." Now I understood what he meant. It wasn't about humility. It was about breaking character, forcing me into submission so he could erase me when the time came. But here's the part that chilled me most. According to his personal notes, Daniel actually believed he was doing something noble. In one of his drafts to Briggs, he'd written, "Rays will fight this, but that's the point. Every operation needs a whistleblower. Keeps attention off the real movement." He wanted me to discover just enough to make noise, to make it seem like the corruption ended with him. He was meant to be the sacrifice, and I was supposed to be the scapegoat who accidentally caught him while Briggs stayed clean. He wasn't dumb. He was a decoy. That's why he looked calm when they escorted him out, because he thought Briggs would protect him, spin the story, and bury the evidence. But I wasn't done. I had copies of everything. And I knew exactly how to make sure neither of them ever buried another thing again. They put Daniel on leave, and Briggs froze for a week, like a spider who suddenly realized the fly it had been dancing around was gone. The audit team kept asking me questions, then disappearing into closed-door meetings. Ellen sat me down the day after and said, We're moving fast. Don't talk to anybody outside this room. Her voice was small in a way I hadn't heard before, not weak, just aware that the building was full of people who might snap one way or another. I had two options. Let the board quietly fire Daniel and spin a narrative that ended with rogue employee, or force the hand that protected him. I chose the latter, because spinning things quietly meant Briggs survived, and whoever let Briggs survive would probably try to make me the example so the rest of the team stayed scared. Step 1 was public pressure. Audit would do the forensic work, but without public scrutiny it was too easy to bury. I drafted a one-page timeline and a short cover letter, facts, dates, receipts, screenshots. No flourish. I marked every point where board oversight had failed. Then, instead of emailing it only to the board like the first time, I distributed it strategically. 2 investigative reporters I'd met at a client event, a former colleague who now worked at a local business journal, and key stakeholders listed as recipients on the original memos. I didn't leak gossip. I sent them the packet and a line. If you're investigating company oversight and internal controls, this belongs in your file. The reporters called within 24 hours. Their questions were sharp. They wanted documents, confirmations, pushback. I gave them everything I had, plus the audit contact who'd already confirmed the investigation. When the first story hit, a tidy, factual piece about suspicious expenses and a board-level oversight failure, the newsroom shared it across social channels. That piece made it impossible for the board to quietly sweep things under rugs. Shareholders started calling. The stock dipped. The board convened emergency sessions. Briggs called me once, voice like an apology rehearsed too many times. "Maria, are you sure you want this public?" he asked. I told him yes. I told him I was tired of watching people in suits treat morality like a quarterly metric. What came next was swift. The audit team found enough traces of the reimbursement trail to justify criminal referral. Briggs resigned before they'd finished the formal vote. Daniel, who'd once believed his protections untouchable, took a plea to lesser charges in exchange for cooperation. Kyle's bonus was clawed back. Ellen, who'd fought quietly, was asked to lead a new oversight committee. She called me the next week and said, "You did the right thing." I didn't say hero. I said, "We just did it." The aftermath wasn't cinematic revenge with banners and speeches. There were quiet things that felt like small restorations. My name cleared in HR files, a formal apology in the company-wide memo that still read like legal carefulness, a small promotion to a role that explicitly excluded administrative nonsense and included authority over budgets. I negotiated protections in writing. Audits would be transparent and expense approvals required 2 independent sign-offs. The kitchen stayed clean because someone liked an orderly office. I didn't have to touch a mop. The cost wasn't zero. I lost colleagues who'd been collateral, embarrassed, paranoid, unemployed. I had sleepless nights for months, and I knew that anyone who wanted to retaliate could still try. But Briggs' resignation was real, Daniel's legal problems were real, and the fake invoices were gone. The satisfying part wasn't that they suffered. It was how small, human, and inevitable it felt. The math didn't lie, the receipts existed, and the company had to answer. The final kicker came 3 months later when the board posted a new policy on fraud prevention with a line that felt like a private joke to me. Employees are encouraged to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. I filed that policy under my performance notes. A coworker joked at our team lunch, "Guess you built character after all." I laughed, because character built under duress isn't the same as integrity earned. I knew the stakes had been higher than a kitchen or a bonus. But I also knew the truth. Sometimes the only way to protect talent is to make the company remember its own name. And if anyone asked later how it happened, I had a clear answer. I cleaned the kitchen, and then I cleaned house.